The movie that I used for the psychological disorders and the movie's project was Clean and Sober. And the psychological disorder illustrated in this film was a substance abuse disorder. The man in this movie who was portrayed with the disorder does meet the criteria for abnormal. His behavior shows signs that point to him having an addiction, and that's what made him stand out as the one with the disorder in contrast to all of the other characters. The symptoms that I noticed right away at the beginning of the movie that he showed he had a cocaine addiction, so in this case that was the substance that he was abusing. The symptoms that made me notice this were he was sniffling all the time and he was rubbing his nose like uncontrollably. And I noticed that like right away in the first scene of the movie, I would say. The symptoms presented like later on that showed he had a couple of different substance abuse disorders because he actually also suffered from alcoholism, which would be another substance abuse disorder because alcohol would be considered a substance. Some of these symptoms were like deterioration of his physical appearance, his mood swings, and his talkative habits. You would notice whenever he was having a conversation with somebody else, he would just go on and on and on and was super talkative. And then once he began rehab and was actually no longer using, you also begin to see symptoms of withdrawal. Sorry. So with the withdrawal, like when he was in there, especially during detox, he was vomiting, uncontrollably sweating. And this was actually how he came to figure out that he was an alcoholic, because he obviously knew he had a cocaine problem, but he himself actually didn't believe that he was addicted to alcohol until he had to start like detoxing from it and his body was going through those withdrawal stages. This movie provided a very realistic portrayal of this disorder. It was very harsh and very real, which is what the addiction is. The movie also correctly shows like what the symptoms could be, and the actor that played the addict did a very, very good job at making it believable that he was actually an addict per se. It never really explains or states in the movie the casual factors that caused him to have this substance abuse disorder. I think basically he got into the wrong crowd. He was a businessman, might have gone out and had a few too many drinks and gotten with the wrong crowd and partied. He just started using it as a fun thing to do, and it got out of hand and he found himself addicted. Some additional research I did says that casual factors can include many things, but genetics alone can account for 40 to 60% of a person's chance at developing a problem. Some other factors include the action of the drug, what the person's looking to get out of it, the way it makes them feel. That could cause them to be addicted if they really like the outcome of it. Peer pressure, emotional distress, anxiety, depression, different mental disorders like that, they use it to cope. And environmental stress also can all be factors. For treatment in this movie, the guy, he goes to a rehab facility and he joins the Anonymous Drug Rehabilitation Program. For him, so he woke up one morning next to a girl who had OD'd. Well, the cops start sniffing around and kind of suspecting him. So the thing that actually jumps out to him on this, like, he didn't voluntarily want to go to rehab necessarily because he didn't really think he had a problem. He wanted to go because they promised to keep everything anonymous and he was trying to hide from the cops. But it turned out to be the best decision he ever made. The program started with detox, which ridded him from everything that was in his system, the cocaine, the alcohol, all of it. And then from there, they begin different group therapy sessions once you're completely detoxed. He was kind of distant. He kept refusing the group therapy because, he didn't think he needed to be there. He didn't think he needed any of it. Eventually he catches on once he finds out that this girl had died, that he woke up next to that morning, and, he really actually does try and get some help. He gets a sponsor. He starts to go to AA meetings to help with his alcoholism in addition to his drug addiction. I guess this type of treatment is pretty typical. It generally depends on the type of drug that the person is addicted to. Most of the time, the treatment is usually some type of counseling or rehab program. But with some types of drugs, if people are addicted to them, doctors might actually prescribe some kind of medication to help them get over it without having so many of those terrible symptoms of like withdrawal and stuff. In this movie, his substance abuse disorder had a very negative effect on his life. It caused a lot of problems for him, some of which caused him to have financial problems, which are what led him to even more trouble. He got in trouble with the law, and he had strained relationships with his friends and his family. The substance abuse clearly caused clouds in his judgment, which led him to hanging out with the wrong crowd, which that's how he ended up with that girl who he was doing drugs with, and he ended up waking up next to her and she was dead. And this caused him to kind of run into some trouble with the law because obviously they were suspecting him doing drugs with her. But when the cops were suspecting him, he ran to one of his friends to ask if he could stay there for a while. Obviously, his friend turned him away because his friend and his wife could not trust him to live in their home with the kind of behavior that he had. So his friend turns him away and advised him to go get some professional help. So obviously you can see kind of how that's affecting his friendships, his behavior, his addiction, all of that. And then later in the movie, it comes up about how he had embezzled $92,000 from his company's money because he needed money. He was in financial troubles. Well, he's spending all his money on cocaine. So here he is, goes and embezzles all this money. Well, the company now finds out and they're like suspecting him. So he goes to his parents to ask them for a loan to help pay everything back. They also turn him away. I mean, they can't trust him that he's going to not go and blow all the money on alcohol and drugs and his bad behaviors that he's had. They scold him for the way that he'd been acting, even though at the point in the movie where he calls them, this was after he had already been in rehab for a little while, but even though he got clean, like, that trust was broken. And that's what substance abuse disorder, it cuts you off from your family and from your friends. They cut you off because they can't trust you. It's just, it even affected his relationships with women. Addictions like this usually push you into toxic relationships because you bond with people that share your interests. Hence why he was in bed with that other woman who had OD'd. They were probably doing drugs together because it was something that they had in common. I think that for the most part, the different impacts in this movie were extremely realistically portrayed. It shows the effects it has on your friends, your family, boyfriend and girlfriend situations, and even on yourself, like with his financial issues. The only thing that wasn't really realistic about his financial issues was the fact that he didn't really get in trouble for the whole money embezzlement thing, and realistically, if they knew it was him and he had gotten caught, regardless of his issues, he would have been penalized for having embezzled that much money. After watching this movie, I must say that I think it would be very, very frustrating to have a mental illness. It would completely overtake your life unless you do something to help it. And I would like to think that if I had some sort of mental disorder, I myself would want to go and get help. Or if I didn't, I would like to think my family would push really hard to get me better and to get me well. One of the things that I think would be the worst about having any kind of mental illness would be that people would often label you or look at you in a certain way, like you're crazy. In all reality, most people have no idea what the person could be going through, and most people don't really even know what the different parts of that mental disorder, like the effects that it can actually have on the person. And even with addiction and drug abuse, it's harder to control than some people may know. So I would get frustrated with feeling like no one understands me and how hard it actually is to get better. Overall, I thought it was a very good movie, and it showed the severity of the disorder. I liked how raw and real it was, They didn't try to hide or sugarcoat anything at all. They showed how much something like that could really mess up your life and how painful and gruesome the rehab process can be on not only you, but on your whole family and any of your friends that actually truly care about you and have to see you going through something like that. It really opened my eyes to how careful you have to be to not get into drugs and to be extremely careful with alcohol, because substance abuse disorders are definitely nothing to mess around with. Thank you.